Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody, to a special episode of Fantasy Football Weekly, where we do something a little bit different from the norm, where we talk to you about the week's activities in the world of fantasy football. And we thought today would be a good day to kind of take a step back and think about, well, what is fantasy football? What are the different ways you can get into it if you're a newbie, or even if somebody you've been playing for a while and you just don't know these things exist. We're going to tell you about it. We're going to tell you all the basics that we know. Go into do a little deep dive into each one of the different facets, and then answer your questions as far as what you may have in regards to playing fantasy football. So let's get to it. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards, and with me today we got John McGlynn and Justin Taylor, aka John McGlynn 75 on X, and JT Orange on X as well. John, let's start with you, man. You rolled into the studio hot and ready to go, man. You are ready to talk some fantasy football, aren't you?
I'm ready to go. Anytime we talk about like fantasy football 101 or like the starting of leagues and stuff like that, this is right up my alley, man. So I appreciate the invite. This is fantastic, especially I'm here with the two most handsome men on the planet, so it makes the night a little bit easier. So
thank you very much, sir. JT, what's going on, brother?
Not much. Just working away, getting things done. So I had a couple good shows last night with the Shoot the Gap, and we did the Dynasty Startup Draft. A couple guys that were in the draft jumped in. I'm in a few charity leagues with drafting currently, so that was fun to get some of those guys that I'm already in a draft with to jump in there with us. So two good shows last night. Looking forward to tonight.
Nice. And of course, for those who are unaware, we have what we call here Fantasy and Frames Wednesday, where we basically take over the Fantasy and Frames YouTube channel and Facebook channel and X channel. That sounds kind of bad. Twitter channel. And we basically talk to you about Dynasty. We talk to you about the world of Redraft. We talk to you about IDP / Defensive Fantasy Football. And we cover it's basically three podcasts in one night, 1 hour each. And we had a really good night last night. I think everybody is really proud of the work we did here at Fantasy and Frame. So definitely check it out, whether you are watching on YouTube or listening, on your favorite podcast platform. We'd appreciate you tuning in and letting us know what you think. And then JT and John, you had a show earlier on the Fantasy and Frames channel. John, you want to tell the folks a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a Dynasty evaluation show. You can find it right here on the fantastic Fantasy and Frames YouTube channel. It's fantastic. We talked about redraft sleepers who are also dynasty keepers, guys who are down the road a little bit, that when you start up a fantasy football league, whether it be redraft or dynasty, most of these guys are already gone in dynasty due to rookie drafts and the depth of the dynasty roster. But for redraft, there's some guys late. My keepers, I had Jacob Cowing, JT had Josh Downs. I had Dylan Lobby, and JT had who's your second guy, JT?
Devontae Wicks from the Packers.
Dontavian Wicks from the Packers. Yeah. So those are guys, some redraft guys, they may have heard about the Dontavian Wicks, Josh Downs, especially because he had a couple catches last year. He had a couple decent weeks. Some of my guys were rookies coming in that may not have been heard of by guys entering the redraft sphere this offseason or this when they start drafting. But some dynasty leagues, some redraft leagues are only 12 to 15, 16 deep, and then they also have kickers and defense involved in them. So they may not even ever hear these guys until they break out 1 week, or they're a waiver wire fodder, a hot commodity in the middle of the year in case somebody gets hurt or something like that. But it's guys that in the fifth round of dynasty leagues, I'm definitely fourth and fifth round of dynasty leagues. Those are like hot commodities. And like I said, some of the guys that I drafted in the fifth round or other people draft, they expect a third round pick already for them. So they're already moving up the draft boards due to popularity, things like that. But just that show along with I did a show last night. We did a startup draft also on here on Fantasy and Frames. It was a busy night, busy week, busy everything here. I love it. Being in this family of Fantasy and Frames and having something to do all the time whenever I have time. Like, it just happens. This is my couple days off. My wife's working a lot of hours. My kids are busy. It's like, yes, I get to sit down and just talk fantasy stuff on these podcasts. So it works out perfect. Thanks for having me.
Man, absolutely. Absolutely. I guess let's go around the frames really quick and just give everybody a brief summary of like how we got into fantasy football. What is it that we find? Well, let's narrow this down a little bit more. What do we find exciting about playing fantasy football? JT, we'll start with you.
I like the camaraderie, playing with friends, starting out with friends, and I've met a lot of people playing now online with guys and everything, and just the strategy involved with it. I love that every league is a little bit different. You can't just completely draft the same team across the board, at least in the leagues I play. I like that the scoring's different, there's varieties, and that, it just takes a little bit of different strategy, a little bit of thinking about it. And I love that you can do that different ways and win different ways. So just the competing is a big thing for me. Played a lot of sports in high school and growing up, and so this is kind of, helps feed that. You want that athletic. You miss those athletics. You miss getting out there and competing. So this is kind of a way to compete, sitting in front of your computer or your phone, I guess.
Love it. Hello to Albert in the chat. How you doing there, sir? Welcome back to the Fantasy and Frames Network. John, what is most exciting to you about playing fantasy football?
Just like JT said, I played fantasy football. I played football since 4th grade. I watched it. I watched it and the NFL at home, and the Bengals still had Bengals written on the side of their helmet. When the Oilers were still a team, when all the things were just awesome. As a staple in the NFL. It was, I was a big Dolphins fan. I did not like the Bears because they traded away Wilbur Marshall. I was so pissed. He was my favorite player on the Bears back then. But playing football all the way from grammar school, all the way through high school and into college, then you're done. It's over with. You're not making. I didn't make the NFL. Obviously, I'm not a bazillionaire, rich, nice family, all the good stuff like that. It comes to the NFL. But there had to be some way for me to go back and enjoy it instead of just watching the games. And my brother actually had a fantasy football league with some of his friends. I never heard of it. And he let me join. And it was all mostly his friends with me and one of my friends. And I thought this is the coolest thing ever. You get to sit back and just, you're like the GM of a team, and you get to, pick your favorite players. And, sometimes you make some trades. And, that league was pretty cool, but there was so much collusion, so much stuff going on back in the day. There was the commissioner was like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. So I started my own leagues, and I started leagues that were back in 2001, something like that. It was 2 quarterbacks all the time. And if you guys aren't familiar with having a 12-team, 2-quarterback fantasy football league, it is awesome. But some teams won with Mark Sanchez and as their starting quarterback. I think it was Mark Sanchez, and who was the Jaguars quarterback back? Wasn't Brunell?
Brunell?
It was Brunell. Yeah, it was Brunell. Mark Sanchez and Mark Brunell was the starting quarterbacks for guys that won in the 2-quarterback league, and we couldn't believe it because it was like quarterback like it is nowadays. But a 2-quarterback league is even worse. But that's how I started my formats. There's no right way or no wrong way to start a fantasy football league. Whatever you guys like, whatever interests you. If 2-quarterback is too hard for some of your league mates, 1 quarterback is just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't be league shamed or fantasy football shamed or anything else like that. It's what you enjoy. It's what you and your friends all vote on when you start a league to enjoy. Redraft is kind of tough for me because it's very hard to trade. If you know a guy like me, I send 70 trades out a week. I'm in all the time sending trades out, and redraft is fun, but trade only goes on for about the first 5 or 6 weeks. It's maybe 7 weeks of the season, because at that point in time, you already know there's some guy who is the best team in the league, but he scored the most points, but he's 0-7 because of luck or something happened like that. And then, once you're eliminated from the playoffs, you really can't trade in redraft, or else if you're eliminated from the playoffs, there's no reason to trade in redraft. It's pretty much at that point in time. The only teams that are, when you're numerically eliminated from the playoffs, it makes it just makes for the league to put a cap on what you can do. You're no more trading, no more waiver wire stuff like that, because you're out of league. It doesn't matter anymore. It's hard for some people to grasp those kind of things. It's a reality of redraft football, which I don't like that. I like Dynasty, where I can trade 365 days a year. Christmas morning, I get up, I open presents to my kids, and I send trade offers out. That's what I do. I absolutely love the all year round stuff. And if you don't like that, if you want to be left in the off season, redraft is your world. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that either. But I started out with 1 or 2 leagues, and then I got in 3 leagues one year, and I was too much for me. I was like, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. One of my buddies said, hey, just try to win every league individually. Don't worry about it. If you need 100 yards with no touchdowns for Calvin Johnson this week, but you need in that league, but the other league, you need 99 yards and 1 touchdown for Calvin Johnson. Another one, you can't compare that stuff. Just try to win every league individually. And now I'm in 20 leagues, and JT's in 35,000, and Jorge, you're probably in 20 also, or something like that. You just get addicted to it because now you know how to manage. Just try to win every league. Sometimes it's for the money, sometimes it's for the bragging rights, whatever it may be. You just join the leagues to have fun. And I have fun with 20 fantasy football leagues. It kind of sucks setting lineups on Sunday morning, but I love playing fantasy football. I love the game of football. I love playing football. I love watching football. I love everything about it. I love being with my friends in my garage, at my neighbor's house, starting up my Mighty Glen Dynasty home leagues that I run. Everything about fantasy football just is some people golf, some people hunt, some people boat, some people do this stuff. I couldn't imagine life without football being part of it like 7 days a week, every week of my life.
Dude, I 100% feel everything you just said. And you talked about a couple things there, Redraft, Dynasty, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So two things before I get into what really got me interested and I find excited about fantasy football is you mentioned setting your lineup. So here at Fantasy and Frames during the season, we have our pregame show starting at 8 a.m. Eastern and going till like 12 p.m., basically an hour before kickoff, depending on your time zone. And I kid you not, as soon as we're done with our show, there's no like hanging out to be like, hey, let's talk until kickoff. It's like, yo, we got like 30,000 lineups to set. Everybody better get off the stream right now and go to your phones or computers and set your lineups to finalize everything, because the last bit of injury news has come out. The last bit of who's starting, who's sitting is coming out. Like we got stuff to do, and it's hilarious how quickly the studio here clears out. For me, though, what really I find exciting about fantasy football is games or players I guarantee you probably would not pay attention to. You pay attention to when you're playing fantasy football, because those are the players that, believe it or not, can help win you or cost you your matchup from week to week playing fantasy football. When I first started playing really competitively was the year that Tim Tebow was with the Broncos, and he led them to the playoffs, and they beat the Steelers in the playoffs with the walk-off touchdown with Demaryius Thomas.
Killed me.
He went on the following week to New England, and the Patriots, had their way with Tim Tebow and the Broncos. But all season long, all you hear on the NFL shows is how much Tim Tebow sucks. But then I'm looking at my fantasy scores, and I'm looking at where he's at being ranked, and I'm like, Tim Tebow is like kicking ass in fantasy. Like, what's wrong with you guys? And that's when I first learned the differences between watching the NFL, as a game, and then watching fantasy football. And again, you hear a player suck so many times, you're probably not paying attention. But then if you look at your fantasy score, it's like, no, I better be paying attention. Another game that I can think about is a Thursday night game. It was the grossest game of like the season. I want to say it was the Tavon Austin-led St. Louis Rams versus, I think, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they were wearing their color rush jerseys. And it was like a bright yellow crayon versus a bright red crayon, and they were going at it. And Tavon Austin was a player who was more like a gadget player or like a special teams guy. And he scored, like, I think 3 touchdowns that game, and he totally set people up for success that week. And I was just like, man, if it wasn't for you, I would not be watching this game right now. And then there was a game back in 2016 where it was the Los Angeles Rams versus the 49ers in Santa Clara. Shanahan's first year coaching, it was Shanahan's second year coaching, McVay's first year coaching. And everybody getting into this game was like, there is no reason to watch this game. This game is going to suck. It's not going to be fun. These two teams suck. It was probably, to this day, the most entertaining Thursday night football game I've ever seen in my life. So fantasy makes, watching the NFL even more exciting if you're an NFL fan. And like these two guys just said, just the camaraderie you have with your fellow league mates, just talking shop, just talking anything. You like being around your friends regardless, of what you're talking about, but you take that little competitive edge and nature that this game has. You gotta love it. You gotta love it. And John, I want to go back to what you're talking about to kind of get into more of the layout of the world of fantasy football. You were talking about play however you want, okay? And I 100% agree with that. Play with whatever rules you want to have. But if you're new to the game, let's go over some of like the basics that you kind of find when you download an ESPN app or a Sleeper app or a Yahoo app. And that is typically your default settings, okay? In terms of roster construction, they normally give you a default roster where you have like a quarterback, 2 running backs, depending on the platform you're using, 2 to 3 wide receivers, a tight end, a defense and special teams. I'll get to that in a second, and a kicker. So, for example, if the defense holds, if the NFL team's defense holds their opposing offense to, fewer points, that's more points for you. If your special teams, makes a touchdown or something like that during the kickoff, that's points for you. Take that a step further, we have different scoring settings. The most popular one nowadays, although it is shifting back and forth, to be honest with you, the more I keep reading about it, is point per reception. And it sounds just like it is what it sounds like. If you catch the ball on top of the yardage you got from making that catch, you get an extra point. For half PPR, which is the second one, same principle. Then you have what everybody started off with back in the day, which was non-PPR, where there was no extra point for receptions. You basically, whatever you saw on the field is what you saw in your, helping you with your point totals at the end of every game. And so that's just with offensive players. Now you introduce the fact that you can now play fantasy football where you have defensive players. You can get rid of that defense special teams malarkey. Yes, I use the word malarkey. I'm from the 1920s. And you can use individual defensive players or IDPs, and you can throw that in there. And to what John was saying a little bit earlier, everything you can set your roster, you can set your scoring however you want it, but don't be turned off by that. Don't be intimidated or overwhelmed, because there is a default scoring setting per play on the field that corresponds to a certain point value, except for IDP. IDP, there is not a standard scoring there. You have free reign of control because it's a little bit different. And if you want to hear that, go back to our show earlier in the offseason where we're doing IDP Fantasy Football 101 here on our YouTube channel. And you'll have an appreciation for IDP football there. And while you're on our YouTube channel, don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you're notified when Fantasy and Frames puts out our awesome fantasy football content that we're guaranteed to enjoy. And some people ask, why should I listen to Fantasy and Frames? What makes Fantasy and Frames so much different from everybody else? It's us. We have quality people here who just love talking shop. You should see our Discord or our Slack chat. We're just chatting up all the time. It's nonstop, just talking about just anything from life to fantasy football. We're a decent group of individuals who just like engaging with you out there in fantasy land, and as well as just talking shop with each other. And we hope you enjoy our company. We hope you walk away like, hey, I was just watching my friends talk for the past hour and a half. You know what I mean? That's the vibe we want to give you. But yeah, so that's kind of, where it's at. You have your offensive players, you have your defensive players, and then from there we filter into a whole different set of categories. And JT, let's go with you. Let's talk about like one of the four main categories, I think, today of fantasy football, and that is redraft fantasy football. Can you give the people like a 101 as far as like what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, so redraft is you're picking your team every year. It's a new team. Draft a new order. Every league does differently on how they do the order. Some do it on how they finish the last year before. I've seen people literally do a race. I've seen people do anything. So you can determine a draft order however you want. My main league that started as a redraft league and eventually became a keepers league, which we'll talk about. That league has been one of my longest leagues going. I've had that league for 16, 17 years now that I've been running it. There's a bunch of guys from high school. I started the league when I first moved back to Illinois back in the early 2000s. I think it was 2006, 2007 is kind of when we got that league going. And that league is still on ESPN. It's one of the few ones I still have on there. And it's your classic lineup: 1 QB, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex, a kicker, and a defense. We start 9. Including the kicker and defense, and we have 8 bench spots, 2 IR spots. So it's a pretty classic one. The only difference in that between kind of the old school is we do a full point per reception in that league. But that's the only kind of craziness we really do. We don't really add any other scoring, no super flex, nothing like that. So it's a kind of a traditional league. I talked to the guys in the league about whether they wanted to change it a couple years ago, and a lot of the other guys are in dynasty leagues with me. So they're like, no, let's just leave this one kind of the way it is because we're in the leagues with the super flex and the tight end premium and the huge bonuses. We're in a bunch of those other leagues with you. So we've kind of kept that one kind of traditional. And And it's a fun league. We added just a little bit. We added 2 keepers to the league a couple years ago where we started doing that just to kind of add a little something to it, keep people involved when they're kind of out of it at the end of the year. But like John said, you don't get a lot of trading in those leagues. It's like people are pretty much, unless they get an injury or something, you just don't see a whole lot of people make moves. But those are easy leagues. You're most teams, if you're in a 10 or a 12 team league and you're doing a redraft like that, if you're only starting, 7 players plus a kicker and defense, most teams are going to be pretty good because it's not super thin. It's not like those leagues where you get in a lot more teams. You're starting 12, 13, 14 guys. Well, then it gets real thin real quick. But so everybody, the good thing about those are if you haven't played in a lot of leagues, you're not having to know everything about all the players in the league because it's usually just the top, 100, 150 guys are all you're really worried about. So just really easy, simple settings. Most points for people these days are somewhere 4, 5, or 6 points per passing touchdown, 6 points for rushing and receiving touchdown. Most leagues do 0.1 point per yard, rushing and receiving 0.25 points, 1 point per 0.25 points passing. It just very, very basics. And then I think in my league, I think we give you a 2-point bonus if you go over 300 passing, over 100 rushing, over 100 receiving. So that's really the only bonuses we do in that league. So pretty standard. And pretty kicker defense standard, extra points a point. A 30-yard field goal is 3, a 40-yard field goal is 4, a 50-yard field goal is 5. And then, get some bonus points if your defense shuts a team out. But the high scoring in the league, that's about the only adjustment I've made over the years in that league is I've taken the points down, the negative points down a little bit. We had some teams getting smoked for 35 points. Our teams scored like negative 15. So we've adjusted the negative points just a little bit. But that's kind of your typical every year redraft, new players, new draft order. And usually typically redraft, you're going to go snake style. So anybody that doesn't know what snake is, it's basically you go 1 to 10 or 1 to 12, depending on how many teams in your league. If you're the last pick in the first round, you get the first pick of the second round. If you had the first pick overall in the first round, you're going to get the last pick of the next round and then the first pick in the third. So that's typically what redraft style is.
So I want to touch on a few things here before, John, we talk to you about Dynasty and you give us like the rundown as far as everything that goes on there. You said the terms flex. You said the terms super flex. I did not mention those in the roster construction earlier. Just want to get to that. So what is a flex spot? It can be a traditional flex spot. It could be an extra wide receiver, an extra running back, an extra tight end. You throw in a super flex spot. That could be an extra quarterback, an extra running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So again, these are different options you have to construct your fantasy football team. Now, John, let's talk about Dynasty Fantasy Football, and there's a lot to talk about here from the minute the NFL season ends to rookie drafts to the NFL draft to startup drafts. I mean, like, where do you want to start with this?
Well, I'm going to start with we had leagues for a while it was first straight redraft where you pick your guys at the end of the season, you throw them all back in the pot, and you start from scratch the following year. And then we got what's called keeper leagues. You get to keep 1, 2, 3, a couple, whatever you want to. I've seen some leagues keep 4 or 5 players. And I was so pissed because some people, they drafted Patrick Mahomes in round 20, 18 or 19. And every year you get a 1-year penalty for having a guy. I got drafted in round 19. Next year you got him around 18. Next year you got him around 17. You keep this guy for 15 years, and he's the number one Josh Allen's or Patrick Mahomes. I'm like, you drafted this guy out of luck in round 17, and you're going to get Patrick Mahomes as your starting quarterback for that. It's if you were to have Patrick Mahomes and Saquon, I'm not even going to say Saquon, but somebody else that was like an Alvin Kamara for years just killed everybody. And those were your 2 keepers. You got them in late rounds because they were flyers when you drafted them as a rookie the year 1. I'm like, this is crap. You're not going to have this advantage in the league for the next 10 years for this. So I wanted to go to Dynasty. I want everybody to keep everybody they drafted. If this is the way it is, let's get rid of this keeper league stuff. if we're either we do redraft and start from scratch every year, or we go dynasty where everybody just builds on their team from square one. So that's what we did. We converted from redraft to dynasty. JT, I see you're itching.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, before you get deep into the dynasty, for anybody that is maybe doing a redraft league and they want to maybe jump to keeper before they trade dynasty, that's kind of how I got a lot of my guys. We went to keeper, then eventually went to dynasty, full dynasty. John, you're right. We did that in my league. So we started doing it where you got the guy in the round, you drafted him the very next year, and then he goes up 2 or 3 rounds. I'm also in another league where you can max keep a guy for 3 years, and then he has to go back in the pot. So there are different options if you are going to go keeper to kind of fix what John said, where a guy's not getting Patrick Mahomes for a decade in your league. You can do setup ones like that. So I do have one that's a 3-year max. The other ones, I do have guys jump up 2 rounds every year. But that also promotes people not necessarily keeping their first or second round guys, the highest end players, because you want value. So guys are looking like, hey, I'd rather keep this guy that's probably going to go in the 3rd or 4th round, but I got him the year before in the 16th, 17th round. So I'm going to keep him for value wise because I get him a lot. I have him locked into my draft spot a lot later than before. So if you got any questions about that, hit us up, in the comments. Also can always hit up any of us on Twitter after the show if you're looking to kind of maybe transition from a keeper, a redraft league to a keeper. Just wanted to say that before John dives in to all there is that is dynasty.
So then we get rid of this. We get rid of this keeper format, which it just some people love. I'm at work all the time talking to some people who do the redraft, the keeper league, redraft keeper leagues. They love that format. They love keeping 1 or 2 guys. Again, it's okay. That there's nothing wrong. There's no wrong format. There's no wrong host site. If you were playing ESPN, or if you play on Sleeper, if you like MFL, if you like, there's a couple new ones that started off the last couple of years. Nothing wrong with that. As long as everybody likes the format, they're used to it. Whenever I start a dynasty, the first thing I do is I do the first year in a redraft form. And it kind of like, people are like, what? You do nothing but dynasty? Yeah. But I want everybody to know how to use the waiver wire year 1, year 2. I want everybody to know how to pick up players year 2. I want everybody to know how to bid on free agency in year 2. I want everybody to know how to use every function of the site, trading wise, whatever it is. Every time I start a dynasty league, year 1 is redraft, and then year 2 is dynasty, because everybody's familiar with the site, everybody's familiar with the rules. I have a how do you call it? I forgot the name. They said a manifesto for my league bylaws. JT's in my league. He sees it. It's like 16 pages long.
League Constitution.
League Constitution is forever. That's one thing. If you're going to start a dynasty league, it's much more important to be on the same page and have all the rules set from square one. The hardest thing to change is scoring, I found out over time, because once people draft in year 1 of a dynasty league, you can't really change the scoring because you draft your players depending on how they're going to score. You're going to draft Josh Allen because of rushing ability. Some guys don't want the quarterbacks who just sit in the pocket all day long. Scoring is the hardest to change, but you can add a taxi squad later. You can add more IR spots. You can add an extra flex player, which we talked about before. Almost all my leagues is start a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and then 2 flex spots, which is a running back, wide receiver, or a tight end. And then you could super flex, which is a quarterback, running back, wide receiver, a tight end. You can always add more flex, or you could turn the team from a 12-team league to a 14-team league if other people want to join. Or you can, if people quit, you can go from a 12-team to a 10-team league and then put everybody like in a, separate the last couple players that people quit if somebody leaves your league instead of trying to find a new owner. There's many things you could do to change. But if you're in a dynasty format, for the most part, you're looking to keep everybody for as long as you can, build your roster. In a dynasty format, I like drafting quarterbacks first. I like having the first 3 or 4 rounds of my draft having 2 or 3 good quarterbacks right from the get-go. It's not very uncommon to me for me to have Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes on the same team because I spent the money. I'll trade up. If I have 101, I'll get Patrick Mahomes, and I'll send 3 or 4 picks away to get Josh Allen at pick 2 or 3 or something like that if I possibly can. And that's part of trading. You can't really trade like that in redraft. You can do it in dynasty. I love trading. There's generally speaking, there's probably about 15 or 20 trades in a startup dynasty draft, which is you could trade future draft picks away. That's another thing we'll talk about later. But the ability to trade in dynasty is so much better. Building your dynasty team where you set quarterbacks. If you want to go running back heavy from year 1, that's fine. Running backs don't seem to last as long. And they're not seem to be at top of the pile. Right from the get-go. Some people love, like we saw yesterday, we had a startup draft, and there's a guy named Mr. Scampers. His first 7 picks were nothing but wide receivers, and it was a fantastic build. We're all sitting like, he has no quarterbacks, but damn, to have all those wide receivers, and it was probably all 5 of his 7 quarterbacks were like, he had like 2 wide receiver ones, 3 wide receiver 1s, 3 wide receiver 2s. It was a very impressive, and there's nothing wrong with building a team. That's why Dynasty is great, because you built it from square one and you get to keep these players forever. So you can sit back and be like, yes, I nailed this draft. And there's no wrong. If you look at Dynasty trade calculators are a thing that people use for, to make trades or build their team or see what values are. It's called a Dynasty trade calculator for a reason. They give your opinion of what people are ranked. But if I ask me, Jorge, JT, and all the 3,700 people that are in Fantasy and Frames, give me a value right now of Devonta Smith. I overvalue him. JT may undervalue him. Somebody else may say, I don't like that guy. He's going to be nothing. He's nothing but a Robin to the AJ Brown's Batman for the next couple of years. I love guys like that. That's my team build. You could build your team however you want to in Dynasty, and whatever. It's your Picasso. The way you like to look at it, the way it looks for you, the way you drew it, man, good for you. But there's starting a Dynasty league. I think once you get in it, you get hooked. And then you just can't stop. You can't go back to redraft then, because I think you just see like what you've done. You've painted your master portrait of like you feel like you're the GM of your fantasy football league. It's such a great feeling. And I run 8 Dynasty home leagues. It's all people from the Chicagoland area. And there's some great people in there, content creators and writers and stuff like that. A lot of them are pretty smart dudes, but still, some people just there's 12 people. 12 different values. You could play with your mom, your sister, your next door neighbor. You could play with, Pat Fitzmaurice, who's in some of my leagues. You can play with Andy Behrens, who I'm in leagues with. You can play with any of those guys. It doesn't matter, because you could just have fun with the guys you're with. As long as your league is fun with great people, then you get to keep those same awesome league mates for 5, 10 years, 20 years, some cases. I've heard of people, it's not uncommon to hear people on the internet say, like Scott Fish, been in leagues for 30 years with some people. If you can have a 30-year league with your best friends, that's irreplaceable. You can go on trips. You can go to Cancun. You can go on a cruise and have a draft. You can do whatever you want to. Like, Dynasty is just such a great format.
Yeah, John, I was going to say, and that's how I kind of jumped into Dynasty. I was one of those guys. I always felt like I was a year early on my team. Yeah. And I always really liked my team, and I always drafted a lot of younger guys. And I get my redraft team, and I look at it right before the new draft season, and I'm like, dang, I wish I could just have my exact same team again. That team is going to be awesome. They're going to be even better this year than they were last year. And that's how I got into Dynasty. I heard about this thing, Dynasty, like, oh, you can keep these guys forever. And I'm like, this is for me. Cause I'm one of those guys. My guys are my guys. I'm going to take them. I'm going to hold them. It's so hard for me to get rid of certain players. And so, like, when I heard about it, I was like, Dynasty, where you can keep your guys forever, I'm like, this is perfect. So that's how I got into Dynasty, just because I always was thinking every year, man, I look at my team. Gosh, I wish I had that same team again this year. And so that was really what pushed me into Dynasty. I'm still in some redraft. I know it's harder once you get into Dynasty, but I'm in some leagues that I've been in for 20, 25 years. So I just kind of stay with them just because they're fun. Doing the live draft is always a great time. That's my favorite part of redraft leagues, is just doing the live draft, all getting together and drafting the team. So, but that if you find yourself in that situation where you're in a redraft league and you're always like, man, I really wish I had my same team from last year, Dynasty is what you need to start playing.
When you're writing in Kenbrell Tompkins, and you're writing in Jalen Camp, and you're writing in Julius Thomas and things like that, wow. People never even heard of things, and a couple of them are fail. Like Jalen Camp never panned out. I thought he was going to be a stud. I thought Kenbrell Tompkins from the Patriots was going to be a stud. And then you see guys, and then you get right in Julius Thomas, and he has a career year his rookie year. Like, those are, like you said, a year ahead. Yeah, we look forward. And that was even before I just barely touched in the Dynasty. Like my last year of redraft, starting up Dynasty. But those are guys I traded for. If you want to go deep like that, 12-team, 30-man rosters, you got to join a Dynasty league. It is just such an awesome experience.
Yeah, I remember a year I took Willie Parker. And everybody in my league was like,
Willie Parker.
Who is this guy? They're like, they thought I was insane. They're like, is he actually in the league? Like literally no one in the league knew who he was. They're like, is he even on the sheet? I'm like, no. I was a Steelers fan, so I was like watching all the Steelers stuff, reading all the newspaper stuff on the Steelers. And I'm like, they're really liking this Willie Parker guy. I was like, I'm taking him late. So I grabbed him late. And he had a huge season. I remember Julius Thomas when he had that monster year for the Broncos. And like I was in a weird scoring league. This is one when they didn't do it a lot like this, but it was called Out of Element. And so it was a league where if your quarterback was a rushing quarterback who got touchdowns, it was worth like double what a passing touchdown was. If your running back caught a touchdown, it's worth double than what a rushing touchdown was. Same thing. And then tight end scoring was through the roof. This was the first type of league. At that time, I didn't even know what tight end premium was. I never even heard that term, but this league had super high scoring for tight ends. And we came out and we took it was like Travis Kelce and Julius Thomas, the first 2 picks. And people were like, why are you taking 2 tight ends? We're like, did you see the scoring in this league last year? These guys were like they were like 2, top 5 scorers in the entire league. And so that's why I would say that it's always fun to play in different leagues because then, with the different scoring and those types of systems. So yeah, you always remember those guys that you had, or the guys you thought were going to be great, that just never panned out. I got a million of those guys I can list off.
Just remember that you don't have to go with the scoring that comes on your internet. Like if they say, ESPN or Sleeper or whatever, I have leagues where I have the wide receivers only get a half point for reception. The running backs get a full point reception, and the tight ends get 2 point per reception. Plus there's other bonuses for quarterbacks, how many yards you threw, how deep your passes were, how many touchdowns you threw in a game. There's tiered. If you throw 1 touchdown, it's 6. If you throw a second touchdown, it's worth 8, so you get 14 for a second one. If you throw a third one, it's worth 12. So now you're looking at 29 points or 26 points for 3 touchdowns by your quarterback. But be careful because I had it before where I had kickers. It was a first year of a dynasty league I had with a bunch of like really good friends. And when you're in a league with your really, really, really good friends, you're going to hear about every mistake you make really loud all the time when something goes wrong. So I had kickers. But from 0 to 10 yard field goal was 3 points. 11 to 20 was 4. Blah blah blah. All the way to 60-yard field goal was something. Well, the first week of the season, I believe it was, Sebastian Janikowski had like 7 field goals with like 50 yards, and he scored like I think it was like 62 points in that league. And everybody's like, "This is such BS. The kickers are scoring both of my quarterbacks combined." Blah blah blah. I'm like, wait a minute. And the other guy had -2 for his kicker. It doesn't work like this all the time, It was. That league almost folded because of that first year of Sebastian Janikowski, and it was like, man, it was so hard to get people started on Dynasty. But now those people are like all of them are in like 3 or 4 different leagues. But scoring is hard. That's why you got to do a redraft like year 1, just so everybody knows the stuff, the scoring, get it all. Me and JT just started my first IDP league, which we'll talk about that later. But the IDP league we started, we're doing a redraft year 1 of it. It's a Dynasty, but we're starting a redraft IDP just so we can get all the scoring correctly. We had a bunch of different opinions about how scoring is. I'll match up Patrick Mahomes with the best defensive player, and then we'll walk away, and it's good. Well, there's a lot more we're finding out there's a lot more intricacies with scoring than just matching up the top 2 guys. We want to see what the linebackers do, how much a tackle's worth, how much is a reception for running back compared to a safety tackle, things like that. Like, so there's a lot of things that we were trying to get through, and we're going to have a big test league year 1 and see how the scoring went. We'll make all the adjustments, and then we'll get back to you on Fantasy and Friends about how it worked out, and maybe we'll come up with the perfect scoring system. I mean, people have been doing this for a while. We're not the first ones to do IDP, but I can't wait to really dig in and find out the scoring settings in these leagues.
Yeah, and I thought this was a good one, Jorge, especially me and you love IDP. I've been trying to get John in IDP. He said he was never getting an IDP league. Now he's in one. I think he's going to fall in love with it. But I thought this was a good idea. John was like, hey, why don't we do redraft year 1? Just because we have a lot of newbies that have never played IDP. And we just didn't want people to feel like they were behind the 8 ball, like they screwed up the initial draft and now they're like in trouble for the rest of the time. So we're like, okay, let's do 1 year redraft. Let all the guys that have never played IDP kind of get their feet wet. Let them feel it out, see how the scoring works. And then we can make some adjustments and then do a new draft the next year. It is a little more time consuming to do it that way. But we felt like with a lot of new guys, that was kind of the way to go, since we had some veterans in there and some new guys, so that everybody didn't feel like, okay, I didn't know where to take defensive players. After this first year, I kind of have a better idea. And now I feel like I'm real comfortable going into the next draft, which will be, our official dynasty draft. So I thought that was a good idea, I thought, by John, to kind of get people that were nervous about trying it, not to feel like, oh man, I'm going to screw up this first draft and then I'm screwed for the next 5-10 years that I'm in this league.
So a couple things I want to touch on real quickly before we get to our next format of fantasy football. And I want to go in reverse order. So, JT, you talked about this IDP league that you and John are in, or the several that you're in. Fantasy football is a worldwide sport, a worldwide game. People play this all over the world, like every continent. Like everybody, you got penguins in Antarctica busting out their phones playing fantasy football. Like that's how widespread it is. We have a content creator here at Fantasy and Frames, Peter Petrovic. He's in Serbia. And these guys are playing in IDP leagues and talking, the weird hours of the day, of the night, because time zone changes. It really is a unifying game to play. You gotta love it.
Football's just so different than any other sport that. I was just talking. We were just talking about this on a past show, but the fact that I'm in leagues with guys from all over. I'm in Discords and things that I talk guys from, England and Ireland and Australia. And like you said, Peter in Serbia, I'm a late nighter. So I'll get up and those guys are getting up in the morning, getting ready for work. They're jumping on the chat, and I'm, not even in bed yet. It's 2, 3, 4 a.m. And I'm like chatting those guys up, answering some questions, talking to them while everybody else is still asleep. It's just a good time. And the fact that, it's an American sport really, but it's really been accepted worldwide. And you have all these teams. If you've seen, the games in Germany and the games in England and they're going to do the game in South America this year. And you see all these fans show up and they've all picked a team. Oh, that's my team. I'm an Eagles fan. I'm a Patriots fan. Ton of Jags fans in the UK because they play over there once or twice every year. So just, I just think it's so fun how many different things there are. And I jumped on an Eagles show with a bunch of guys from Europe last year. They had me on as a guest. It was super fun. These guys just happen to live in this town and all their friends decide they're all going to be Eagles fans. So they do an Eagles podcast in Europe. So it's so awesome. It's just such a fun game. I play in everything fantasy. So don't get me wrong. I'm playing everything, but nothing is like playing fantasy football. Nothing's the same.
JT, 100%. That was awesome. It couldn't have been a better league for us to join because me and JT have the most messed up schedules in the world. We're up. I work rotating shifts. I'm up midnights. I'm up days. JT's up. Me and him are talking to each other at 4 a.m. sometimes about fantasy football trades, things like that. And we had a draft that was guys overseas. So they were, we couldn't have a time clock when we did this draft. It was, I'm not a big fan of the online drafts, but this was a great online draft for me to start with. The guys who were familiar with IDP, and they were from all over the world. No time clock. It took a lot longer than a regular draft would be because no time clock in different time zones. But it ended up being a lot of fun, and it should be pretty interesting with our schedules.
So we got a comment here in the YouTube chat right now. Are there any leagues you guys recommend for people getting into it, both Dynasty and Classic? So let me take this one for the beginning here, and you guys can chime in if I miss anything. So like we were alluding to earlier, Redraft is kind of the way to get your feet wet in the world of fantasy football. You don't have to worry about, having, if your team is bad, you don't have to worry about having that team next year. If your team is good, well, then you have the challenge of building another good team the year after that. When I started playing fantasy football, I didn't have a lot of friends who played fantasy football. So I went I went to ESPN, and I joined one of their public leagues. And, and that's where anybody can join a fantasy league and you can have your draft and you play week to week and you can talk on the message boards. And that's where I met, a lot of friends who play to this day fantasy football. You never know where you're going to meet people, how you're going to meet people. So that would be the way I'd recommend for getting your feet wet with fantasy football and Redraft. For Dynasty, it's a little bit trickier. I think it's one of those things. Once you have like a core group of people that you're used to playing fantasy football with, then you can kind of take it to the Dynasty level because I think personally it's rare that you find people just openly willing to just take on anybody for their Dynasty league. But I could be wrong. JT, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say I used to think I used to have some openings in some leagues, and it was nightmare trying to get them filled. If you're a Discord user, if you're somebody that uses Discord, and if you're on Twitter a decent amount, ask some people you follow on Twitter if they know in any leagues or any Discords, because there's quite a few Discords I'm on now that actually have a league classified section on the Discord. So if you're looking to join a league and people have openings in their leagues, they'll post them on there and you can just jump in. Some of them are like, they ask you questions. They want to know how long you've been playing, or like, they'll ask you certain things about it. I actually did it for one of my leagues this year, and I've never done that before, but I was in a league with a guy, and I'm in a couple reality sports online leagues. So anybody that doesn't know what reality sports online, it's more of a commissioner based league where you use like the salary cap. And so you have to actually have player contracts and things like that. So it's a little more advanced there. And I was having some problems getting some guys to fill a couple openings. I jumped on there and I had, and I bet you a day I had 5 people looking to fill my 1 spot or 2 spots I had in the league. So if you get on there and ask around, there are some Discords that people will usually send you an invite if it's not just an open, they'll send you an invite. Or I've been really surprised at how many spots now in places that I found where it's like, oh, if you really are looking for a league where you can get on. For you, if you're interested in that kind of styles, that's something. Send me a message on Twitter at JT Orange. I can hook you up with a couple Discords I know that have league classifieds, and they take anybody that's willing to play. I mean, there's all kinds of sleeper ones. There's MFL ones. They tell you how much there's free ones. There's ones that are $5, ones that are $200. So there's all kinds of different ones. So that is one of the things with the internet really expanding with the Discords and Twitter and everything else. I do think it's a lot easier to find a league than it used to be. It did used to be pretty difficult. Like all my dynasty leagues, I started myself because I didn't know how to start one, where to find people that played them. But once I got into them and I got in a couple of leagues with people, bam, everyone's asking me to join leagues. Next thing I know, I'm getting hit up left and right for leagues. So that's the one thing you got to be careful for. You get into Dynasty, you start playing a couple leagues, and if you're active and fun and a good person, you'll get invited to a lot more.
Sharp by 9. Sharp by 9. I'm going to just kind of give you a quick analogy here. Like you said, getting into it. So if you're a beginner, I'm gonna analogy with getting fantasy football leagues with like learning how to swim, because start with redraft. Redraft is like learning how to swim with a vest on in the shallow end. No matter how bad you do, man, you can just stand up and get out of the pool. At the end of the year, your whole draft is getting thrown aside. It doesn't matter. It's safe. You next year you can fix all your problems. You learn a bit more. You get into Dynasty, it's like going to the deep end with you could get out of it yourself if you want to, as trading, things like that. But it's a little bit more scarier. It's a little bit more harder to understand. You take a lot more chances, because if you make mistakes, there's a lot more repercussions to your actions or what you did. And then you get into IDP, and you get into IDP is not as scary. It's kind of, if you're into Dynasty, you'll be fine with IDP. Then you get in these campus Canton leagues, which we'll talk about later. Also, these are things that, like, man, it is like going swimming in the ocean. It is like, man, you can do a lot of damage to your team real fast if you're on a different level, like all the way down the rabbit hole of IDP, or C2C and stuff. So start with redraft. You're just getting into it. Look for redraft leagues. There's plenty of all of us have friends that have leagues looking for somebody. You feel free to talk to anybody on the Fantasy and Frame site. We'll all be able to help you. Scott Fish has a bunch of leagues that that I forgot what they call those leagues that you jump into, but
he's got a lot of the FC, the Fantasy Cares, Eliminators, stuff like that. Those ones are really easy too. I know, Jorge, we're going to talk about it if we have time, but a lot of those are best ball leagues. Best ball leagues are a great league to kind of just get your feet wet as well, because you're not even setting a lineup. You're just drafting a team and letting your team go, and your best players are counting every week. So those ones are good ones as well, especially if you're just like, hey, I want to try to get into some and kind of see what this is all about. Those are pretty good leagues, and you can find a lot of those best ball leagues out there. A lot of them are charity leagues, so they're free, or they're $5 a charity or $10 a charity. So those ones are always fun. I always get it. And I'm in a ton of leagues. I still get in a bunch of those every offseason just because I think they're fun.
You just hit the nail on the head on our next topic, which was best ball leagues. And just to piggyback of what JT just said, for me, one of the things I find most exciting during a calendar year is eating on Thanksgiving, opening presents on Christmas, and draft day in my fantasy football leagues. And everybody loves drafting their fantasy football team, whether it's a redraft, whether it's a dynasty, whether it's your rookie drafts in dynasty. And so what is best ball? Best ball is just drafting. You just draft your team before the season starts. There's no in-season management. You don't have to worry about setting your rosters. The team that you draft is the team that you roll with all season long. So let's say you have 4 wide receivers on your team or 5 wide receivers on your team, and you're supposed to start 2 to 3 wide receivers. Well, the 2 to 3 wide receivers that have the highest scoring total in points that week count towards your overall team's point total. So those are the ones that can help you win your league. And the same goes for the other positions, running back, tight end, flex, and so on and so forth. So those are fun, and those are really easy, and you don't have to worry about, again, the minutia that comes in with playing in a redraft. You kind of take things from here on out. Guys, we're approaching the 1 hour mark, and we do have to roll in a little bit. And I did want to take some questions and basically, just turn this into like, what are things that, we should have known last time. And I guess we'll do that in our next show. I guess we're having so much fun here. I think, guys, we need another show in terms of Fantasy Football 101 because there's so much to talk about.
Well, and then you had me and John on the same show. We're going to start talking it up. That's the problem. You get me and John together, we just start yapping. It happens. We're always having to watch the clock.
Tell you what, let's hold off on Devi and Campus to Canton until we get into next week's show, as well as answering some questions as far as like, the basics of fantasy football, or we can answer trade questions. We can answer whatever questions you have about fantasy football in general.
Can I add real fast that I think that best ball is cheating just like keeper leagues is. It's BS because when you best ball, you draft this team and it's like, no matter, you can't make a mistake. You draft 10, 15, 20 players, whatever it is, no matter what, your best players are getting their scores added up. And that's your whole league does that way, but you can't make a mistake where the part of the thing of setting a lineup or being in lineup leagues is that, man, when you start the wrong guy, you're like, the decisions of having your third wide receiver and you're like, do I start Devonta Smith or do I start Chris Godwin? And you sit Devonta Smith, and all of a sudden that week he has 3 touchdowns and 150 yards, and Chris Godwin came in the game and pulled his hamstring first play, and you got a 0, and you could have got 37 points from Devonta Smith. That's things in best ball that automatically just tallied up, and as they give you just points, and look at look at me, I didn't have to do anything but just draft a best ball team. It's so much better to have a lineup setting league where you get made fun of for your mistakes, especially in a home league. You have to be accountable.
John's a
for your
masochist.
decisions.
John wants the hurt of having that guy sit on the bench, scoring 35 on his bench. If you don't want to have to worry about making those mistakes and the crazy thing, best ball is a good one for you. But that's why I said I don't play a lot of best ball leagues. Most of the ones I do are charity leagues that I'm in. I'm in 2 best ball dynasty leagues that I've just got into where it takes my best guys, but those ones are a little bit different, a little bit interesting too, just because the lineups, like making sure you have players. It's tough to it's tough to decide who you want on your roster because you're like, if it's best ball, you're like, do I want this guy's backup? Because if he just sits all year, I don't have any chance to get points from him. So it's a different mindset when you go that far. But yeah, like John says, he thinks it's cheating. I think it's it's stress. I say it's stress-free fantasy football.
Yeah, there you go. That's the best way to put it. Folks, we will do Fantasy Football 101 Part 2 next week on Fantasy Football Weekly. I do want to give a quick shout out to the gentleman that was in the chat. He likes to go by his last name, Beer, and it is exactly how you spell it, Beer. Thank you very much for your question. I met him last week at a friend's 40th birthday party, and he goes to a college that I used to go to until I partied too hard and had to had to leave, not by choice. And we were reminiscing about the time, and he was telling me about how he wants to learn about fantasy football, how he has so many questions. And so he was glued in to our show, and hopefully he'll be glued in next week. But we do this at 8 p.m. Eastern here on the Fantasy and Frames channel. And so I want to give a shout out to Beer. I want to give a shout out to his fraternity, Phi Kappa Sigma. Go Big Daniel College. Go Green Terror. Before we end today's show, let's just go around the frames and tell people where they can find you and what you're looking forward to as we get closer to the season. John, what do you got?
I have the Dynasty Evaluation Show, which JT is my co-host. We have a different guest almost all the time, but I find myself getting invited to these awesome shows. I tell you what, I watched some of the shows last night that were I was a spectator just chiming in on a YouTube channel, and it blows my mind that when you think you know a lot about fantasy football, just how much you don't know from people who are smarter than you. You can always learn something from everybody on this channel at Fantasy and Frames. I sat last night and listened to a couple things, and I'm like, oh, man, I didn't know that. Oh, man, I didn't know that. Watching these shows and just seeing the guests and on top of that, the like we had this conversation before, the professionals that work at Fantasy and Frames here, these guys put a lot of time, a lot of effort into what we consider our hobby, but at the same time, this is not just a hobby to us. This is a way of life. And the time we put in, it's some of our family, some of our friends, I think, we're kind of weirdos for doing this kind of stuff. But being in this is like a family to me. Fantasy and Frames is a family. I've been in a lot of sites, a lot of places all over the place. Being with Fantasy and Frames and just, knowing how much I need to get better to keep up with these guys, it's such a great place to be. And everybody just gets along so well here. I'm just happy I'm here every day.
JT, what do you got?
Yeah, it's same. It's been great to be you guys adding us here to the Fantasy and Frames family. You can find me with Dynasty Evaluation with John, me and Jorge. Wednesday nights, the late night show. We do the Shoot the Gap IDP show. So if you're looking to learn about IDP, some of that, or just get some fantasy IDP advice, jump on there with us. I have my show, The Stew with JT Brew, also here on Fantasy and Frames. Haven't done a lot on that channel here of late, but definitely going to pick up as season gets here as I do a lot of gambling shows, a lot of just picks, things like that. So a lot of that going to be coming up. And I do a little bit of everything. So feel free to ask me about anything because I play there. I don't think there's a league I don't play in. So I played in every type of league. So if you got questions about anything, feel free to hit me up at JT Orange on the Twitter machine. I got writings everywhere. I'm all over the place. Fan Tracks, DLF. You can find all my stuff all around all those places as well as Fantasy and Frames.
And I couldn't ask for two better gentlemen to basically get people into understanding the ins and outs of fantasy football. And I can't wait to talk with you next week. And just, to these two and to everybody else here at Fantasy and Frames, just the level of dedication we put into our craft of helping you learn more about fantasy football and have fun playing fantasy football. And I guess most importantly, win playing fantasy football is second to none. You can find me on X at Jorge B. Edwards, as well as on TikTok at Jorge B. Edwards. And of course, you can check out all of our video content and podcast content on our YouTube channel, as well as wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to head over to fantasyandframes.com. Check out our rankings, check out our articles. We have player profile articles going out left and right. We're going to have some other articles coming out soon as we get closer to August and redraft season. And before you know it, the NFL football is back. But before that happens, we'll be back with part 2 of Fantasy Football 101 here at Fantasy Football Weekly next week. So for John, JT, I'm Jorge. We'll see you then.